that they started it. They don't obey court order.
Join the conversation
right here.
Let's talk.
Above and beyond borders.
Beyond borders.
It's Borderline
with Ireti Bakare-Yusuf. This is The Voice Note on 99.3 Nigeria Info. Let's talk.
You know, we've adopted the grinding mentality, which if you look up the word itself, it means to wear down, to torment, to crush, to oppress. And that's why when you see most people who grind, they look wore out. You know, I work hard, but I rest hard as well. I take pictures now when I'm out. I see an elderly couple. Typically, the woman is peppy, ready to move, and you see the older man just on crutches or a cane can barely move, because our whole worth, we feel, is in our work. I thought it was just black men who struggle with taking naps, but when I started speaking more, my white brothers, other brothers of different ethnicities come up to me like, dude, my wife come home, I jump up. I'm like, what is that? Because again, we feel that we're only good for what we do instead of who we are. Our family, our women in our lives try to love us. Our children want to affirm us. But because it's deep, we long for it so long, we don't even know how to receive it when we get it.
This is The Voice Note on 99.3 Nigeria Info. Let's talk.
Your attention, please.
The news, information, and the right conversation are here on Nigeria Info.
How many this type of wicked attack has affected in the other part of this country? So that's what this is for ourselves.
I'm not supporting stealing, but these politicians need to be taught a lesson.
Your number one station for talk.
99.3.
99.3 Nigeria Info. Let's talk. Above and beyond borders.
Beyond borders.
It's Borderline
with Ireti Bakare-Yusuf.
Welcome back to Borderlines, the only show that takes you beyond borders. So you all know, like, sometimes there are some people that I really want to be in conversation with. And then we have a brilliant producer. I don't get them. And I'm hoping I want to keep him for 3 hours, 4 hours. But unfortunately, I think we have 50, 55 minutes. And I'm going to give you his profile. In fact, I'm going to be short because I'm going to be selfish. I want him more to myself than you knowing too much about him. Right. Okay. Since October 2023, the world has witnessed a scale of destruction unprecedented in modern conflict. Entire neighborhoods have been flattened, tens of thousands killed, and a population pushed to the brink of annihilation. Yet, this is not a rupture, it is a continuation. Decades-long project of dispossession and occupation that began 7, almost 8 decades ago. To understand this moment, we need history. We need global context. We need the clarity to name what we are seeing. Not as conflict between two equals, but as the product of systems of militarization, of imperialism, and the abandonment of international law. We need Professor Vijay, Prashad, to help us understand, unpack, and actually find some sort of, I don't know whether it's sanity or balance or existence in a world that no longer makes sense. Prof, welcome to Borderlines. Welcome to Nigeria. Welcome to Lagos digitally.
Yeah, I'm really happy to be with you and very pleased to be in Nigeria digitally.
It's our pleasure. It's our honor to actually have you. And like I said, I wish I could keep you for 2 hours. It's a shame. But I'll get on with it. First of all, one of the things you're known for, obviously, is your writing, 40 books, etc. And, you know, you speak all over the world and people stop and they listen. And I watched many interviews of yours. But before we go further, you are known as a Marxist. I'd like you in kind of like a minute to unpack Marxism for us, especially for my listeners who are, of course, in the diaspora. What is Marxism? And one of the things you also said about Marxism is it shapes who you are as a person, or if I find it good, Marxism teaches you how to be a person. So I'd kind of, if you could do that like in 2 minutes for us, please.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's an interesting question to ask because, you said a world that doesn't make sense anymore. And one of the things that doesn't make sense, you're on the African continent. I was in South Africa last week. One of the things that doesn't make sense is that the African continent is such a rich continent. It has gold, it has arable land, it has coltan, copper, it has all of these minerals, metals, it has very intelligent people, hardworking people, and so on. And yet the African continent is so poor. Why are the people poor? Why are there high rates of hunger? This disparity of information, a rich Congo, one of the richest countries in the world, $2 trillion of known minerals and metals. That's just minerals and metals. And yet so poor, in terms of how much people earn. Why is that so? Well, Marxism teaches us two things. One, it teaches us that history takes place through humans' interaction with nature and producing goods and services. And we know, therefore, on the African continent, that humans produce a vast amount of goods and services. So we should be able to feed ourselves. We should be able to live, very good lives, but we're not. And here's the second thing that Marxism teaches us, that the gap between the rich and the poor is not because the rich work hard and the poor don't work. It's not that at all. The poor work very hard. It's that the rich own things, and those who own things control things, and those who control things take the largest amount of the social labor produced by everybody. And in the case of the continent like Africa, even a rich country like Nigeria, the ownership isn't necessarily within the country. It's multinational corporations, it's oil companies that sit in the Netherlands or in Britain and so on that own the oil fields and take the bulk of the wealth away. So what Marxism allows me to understand is how we are rich and how we are poor at the same time. And it teaches you as a person to make a choice. Do you want to stand with the status quo, or would you like to change the world and make it more equitable? That's what I mean by saying it teaches you to be a human being.
But then, okay, so I'm sure my listeners are going, what's he talking about? Here we are in Nigeria. We're in a developing country. We're broke. We don't have money. The West, IMF is always giving us or pushing or making us borrow money. There's the World Bank. So how exactly do we reconcile this? Our existence as Africans, as people of the global South, which I know you are as well, and this almost euphoric, existence as a Marxist that you talked about.
I mean, let's go back to Nigeria. Okay. Nigeria is the 6th largest producer of oil in the world. Okay.
And we haven't done well with it, though.
Well, that's a question, right? When you think about oil, you think about Saudi Arabia, you may think about, Iran, and so, but Nigeria is the 6th largest. It has the 10th largest oil reserves in the world. I mean, what are we doing? What are we doing? If every Nigerian is given a share of the oil reserves, Nigerians would be millionaires, immediately, because there are billions of barrels of oil underneath your waters and underneath your soil. But because of colonialism, because of, if I may say so, very poor political management of the country, very poor political management of the country, the Nigerian government over decades has gifted its wealth to Western oil companies, whether it's Shell or whoever it is, different companies at different moments, and at the same time has basically surrendered to the International Monetary Fund and said, yes, we are poor, yes, tell us how to behave. I mean, this is really poor political management by the Nigerian government. If you just look north of where you are now, see the attitude in Burkina Faso today of Ibrahim Traoré. Okay, Burkina Faso is a very poor country, much poorer than Nigeria. But at least now you have a political leader who is saying, I'm not a child. Africans are not children. We are grown-ups. We are people just like anybody else. We need to make our own decisions. We need to properly be stewards of our own wealth, which includes the people, the people. I mean, the Nigerian government should be more responsible to the Nigerian people than to the Western creditors and bondholders. Your first priority should be to your own people, not to the board of Shell and other oil companies. I mean, there's a kind of upside down world in which we in the third world live. We live in an inverted reality. We think that we don't deserve primary treatment, and that's colonialism inside our heads. We don't think we should be at the head of the queue. And by the way, I call this the international division of humanity. This idea that there are some people who are fully human. And by the way, in the United States, this was enshrined into law that those who were African were just, whatever it is, 3/5 of humanity. They were not a full human. They actually enshrined a percentage into law. But this attitude, you don't need this enshrined in law. The attitude is not only within those who were the colonial beneficiaries, the people in Europe and the United States. But this attitude is also in us. We also surrender our own dignity and say, okay, fine, I'll take half of what I deserve. And you just take that, or I'll take 1/10 of what I deserve. You take the rest. I mean, you're surrendering your dignity for God's sake, That's the international division of humanity, in my opinion.
I've heard you say that. Now I'm going to need you. We're going to travel further. This time we're going to go to Gaza. Let me give you a quote. It's one by Edward Said. He said, "We have been dispossessed. Our society has been destroyed. It's very difficult to forget that." Now, when you look at that quote, I mean, he said it many years ago, decades ago. It's still right now. I've watched your interview with many people talking about Palestine, talking about Gaza, and the same people keep saying the same thing. Indeed, now we have people outside of Palestine, non-Palestinians, also saying the same thing. Yet, I was watching the Palestinian ambassador to the UK on Piers Morgan just the other day, just 2-3 days ago, I think it was. And he said something which struck. He said, why is it that we, the oppressed, constantly are expected to have a higher moral standing than those who are oppressing us? So I'd like you, and I think that falls into that international division of humanity, I'd like you to sort of put a framework and an understanding of that for us in the context of Gaza and what we're seeing in Palestine as a whole.
I mean, Gaza is the plainest representation of the international division of humanity. I went there after the 2014 bombardment, and I thought, I'm never going to see anything like this again. Entire neighborhoods just destroyed, brought to the ground, malls bombed, universities bombed. I mean, for God's sake, the Israelis just came and just bombed entire straight lines. Here's a mall, here's a house, here's, just brought everything to the ground. This was 2014. The Palestinians rebuilt it, and now it's all gone. Everything is gone. The nature of the bombardment, the scale is unimaginable. If you take a comparison, Russia invaded Ukraine in 2022. Just as a comparison, you look at the bombardment that Russia has done in Ukraine, it's nothing like what you're seeing in Gaza. The Russians are being extremely cautious. They're not even bombing Kiev. There were 1 or 2 attacks on Kiev, but Kiev airport is still running. They haven't bombed all the electricity. They haven't bombed the water supply. Those things haven't happened. They are fighting a different war. They are not trying to pulverize the people. In the case of Gaza, the Israelis just have dehumanized the people. There was a poll recently that came out, a poll done by a reputed Israeli polling company, which only spoke to Israeli Jews, not to Palestinians who live inside Israel and so on. Only Israeli Jews. And here was the result. 87% said that the Palestinians should be removed from Gaza. That, by the way, that statement, Palestinians should be removed from Gaza, is a war crime. It violates a UN General Assembly resolution, which says that Gaza is part of the occupied Palestinian territory. And when you remove people from an occupied territory, something that has been registered as an occupied territory, that's a war crime. That's called population transfer. It's in violation of the Geneva Convention. And then the other statistic from this poll was even more scary. 59% said that when the Israeli army enters a town in Gaza, they should be allowed to kill everybody there. That's utterly genocidal. Where does this thinking come from? What is happening within Israel, within the United States, which is not only backing Israel, but is in fact providing the ammunition and so on? What's happening in Britain? Britain is providing the ammunition, etc. These 3 countries are part and parcel of the genocide. We've experienced Britain. Nigerians know Britain. Indians know Britain. Thanks, Britain. We've seen you off. Okay, you used to be the colonial power. They aerial bombarded people in India in the 1920s. They did the same in Africa. Aerial bombarded people who couldn't fight. That was the International Division of Humanity. Now it's at a different scale. That's what's scary. This idea that you could just kill everybody in a city you've conquered is beyond a war crime. I don't know what kind of moral crisis is going on in Europe, in Israel, and so on. Where are the great moral philosophers, the Bertrand Russells, the Jean-Paul Sartres? I mean, let's go back a couple of generations, the GWF Hegel. Where is Hegel? Where is Sartre? Where is Bertrand Russell? Where are they, in these societies, standing up in front of their own population and saying, what is our moral compass? Do you think it's acceptable to just annihilate 50,000 people, just kill entire families, destroy, the livelihood of generations of children because the noise, the loss of parents? This is going to impact Palestinians for generations. This particular genocidal campaign. Where is the moral crisis? In all our societies, I would say, when something atrocious happens, some moral leaders stand up, whether it's religious people or it's philosophers, intellectuals of different kinds, political persons, they always emerge, and they come in and they say, stop, pause. What are we doing? Is this acceptable? What is this doing to us? Because frankly, and I'm going to close this with this. Frankly, when you as a person say 59% that it's acceptable to go into a city and kill everybody, it's damaging you as well. Your humanity is compromised. You're bringing iron into your soul. Where is your humanity after this? How will the Israelis survive this genocide? I don't think they will. I really don't think they will. I think Israeli culture has been corrupted by this, deeply corrupted. It will not survive this. So both the people who are treated as less than human, the Palestinians, on that side of the International Division of Humanity, but also those people who think that they are greater than human or human, are damaged. Everybody's damaged. The British were damaged by colonialism. The British were deeply damaged by colonialism. And I would say they haven't yet recovered. I mean, the Brexit is a sign of a remarkable British overestimation of their own selves. This idea that, we are British or we are English and we are, no, you relax. You're not, you're just people. And the thing is, for the English, to believe that, they can make it on their own without Europe. Look at the chaos now in England. When will they come to understand that they are just ordinary people? It corrupts you. And I think it's really corrupted, and it's toxified a culture like the Israeli culture.
Can Zionism exist or survive, or even, survive without imperialism? And are they one of the same, two sides of the same coin? And indeed, how do we actually battle Zionism, or do we battle imperialism in order to combat Zionism?
I mean, one of the great myths that the Israeli government has put out there since it seized the land in 1948 is that Israel is somehow invincible. That Israel is a startup nation with a remarkable military. I mean, you may remember when some aircraft were hijacked, aircraft were hijacked and brought to Entebbe airport in Uganda. And then the Israelis came in and they rescued the planes and the people. And actually Netanyahu's brother died in that operation. There was a movie, I think it was called like So Many Hours in Entebbe. Yeah. There were books and whatnot. In fact, these are all exaggerations. Even if Entebbe was an incredible thing, most countries have done something like that at some point. It's not impossible. There is no way that the Israeli state by itself would have been able to prevail over its Arab neighbors without the full-scale backing from the United States and most Europeans, including Germany. That the Europeans have paid reparations to nobody. In fact, they forced the Haitians to pay for the liberation of the Haitian people. The Haitians paid until quite recently. They paid Citibank, for what? For liberating themselves from slavery. The Europeans never paid anybody reparations, except Germany paid Israel reparations, and in fact continues to pay some amounts of money even now. The Israeli state would just not have been able to survive. I mean, the United States provides everything to Israel. They are one and the same. People who have this debate, who is the donkey and who is the tail, doesn't matter. The donkey and tail are united. They are one. It doesn't matter who's the tail and who's the face. Yeah. These things might change at different moments, but no, absolutely no. Zionism would not survive without imperialism. And in fact, this is why what we're seeing in Gaza now isn't just a manifestation of Zionism, it's a manifestation of imperialism. You might ask, why is the United States so interested in Gaza? Well, they have lots of reasons to be interested in Gaza. One of the things they are interested in is obliterating the Muslim Brotherhood, obliterating, these political forces, and the Hamas is the Muslim Brotherhood group. They want to obliterate these groups. They want to create the Middle East in their image. In that sense, they are idealists. I don't think it's going to work, but that's what I think they're trying to do.
One of the words, it's an old word, fascism. We hear it more and more and more today. And can you sort of talk to us about fascism and why we in the developing world should be concerned about it, even if we're seeing it, across the shores and we're thinking, okay, it's over there. Why should we care?
Personally, I'm very interested and have been trying to study in our institute, Tricontinental, what has happened to the grammar of African politics. Because, there was a time on the African continent when the national liberation political parties, whether it was Frelimo or, whoever it was, the ANC, it was SWAPO and so on. These national liberation forces were the key political agents in most of the countries. Nkrumah's main vehicle until the coup was the principal vehicle in the country. In many countries, they didn't allow other political forces to develop. Over the course of the last 35, 40 years in the period of neoliberalism, we've seen the development of a kind of bipolar politics in most countries. You know, there are two political parties vying for power. Others have been sort of pushed out of the mainstream of politics. You know, some of them made alliances with one or the other of the main parties. And this idea of these two parties coming to power, alternating between each other with very similar agendas, is the precursor to a problem. Because if these two elite political parties don't actually look the people in the face and try to solve the problems of the people are going to turn away from mainstream politics. They are going to go elsewhere. That's exactly what has happened in Western countries. You know, when the Democrats and the Republicans basically alternate with each other, but the problems of the people aren't solved, then the people look elsewhere. And here comes Donald Trump. He uses the vehicle of the Republican Party, but it's not the Republican Party. It could have been something else. In Britain, Nigel Farage, his emergence is basically because the two main parties haven't solved the people's basic problems. You know, people that this childhood poverty in the UK, what are they doing? They stole all our money and now their children are poor. That's capitalism for you. So if the two alternating parties don't settle some of the problems or all of the problems of the people, these other forces will emerge, and some of them are quite ghastly. You know, you already see a little bit of this on the African continent. We've seen some of this in Asia. In India, for instance, the rise of the Bharatiya Janata Party, Mr. Narendra Modi is one facet of that. Setting aside all the liberal parties and neoliberal, they just come in and say, listen, okay, fine, we won't solve your jobs problem, but we'll give you somebody to hate. And, you know, it becomes ethno-nationalist. We already see bits and pieces of this on the African continent. In South Africa, it's a little complicated, but the emergence of Mr. Zuma's party in KwaZulu-Natal gives you some indication of some of this, you know, the xenophobia and so on that plays at the edges of these parties. So easy to say, foreigners get out, you know, Nigerians for the Nigerians, and that riles up people, you see. You don't need to say Nigerians should live without hunger. Now that's a good slogan.
That's
no, Nigeria for that's revolutionary. Well, instead it's Nigeria for Nigerians. But that doesn't cost you anything. You know, that means that I'm going to wear a Nigerian suit. I'm going to go back to a full-fledged Nigerian name. I'm going to, you know, start talking in the 3 or 4 main Nigerian languages, and I'm going to say everybody else is a foreigner. It's the old German phrase, Ausländer raus, get the stranger or the outsider out. That kind of politics breeds a new kind of fascism. We call it in our institute the far right of a special type. And the reason we call it that is that it actually emerges because of neoliberalism's failure. The failure to have a politics that deals with people's everyday problems leads to an enormous vacuum. Old fascism in the 1920s emerged to beat back the workers' movement. There's no workers' movement of much strength today. I mean, you're in Nigeria, the strongest trade union in Nigeria is, I think, the teachers' union and the government employees' union, you know, and so on. It's the largest union on the continent. You know, it's an important union, but the Nigerian working class is disarticulated. It is Uberized. You know, in Lagos, you got delivery people all over. You have, you know, informal workers all over. This is not a strong working class. You know, it's not organized. It's not. So the threat isn't coming from the working class. The threat is coming from the fact that the totality of the people are uninterested in political parties. They don't want to vote. They don't think that these parties make a difference. And then here comes your great hero, you know, often the great man who says, I will save you from the migrant, because that's why you're poor, you know, which is not true. I mean, the migrant who works around the clock running a little shop somewhere in a poor neighborhood, that person is not your problem. Your problem is the fact that your government over generations has basically given away the family silver to Shell. That's your problem. But rather than talk about that problem, because if I arrived and talked, I would be assassinated by somebody. Yeah, Ibrahim Traore in Burkina Faso is very scared of being assassinated, like his predecessor Thomas Sankara was assassinated when he talked radical stuff. Chris Hani, South Africa, assassinated. Patrice Lumumba, assassinated. I mean, there's a history in Africa of leaders who say, no more hunger for Nigeria, they suddenly get killed off. But if you say Nigeria for Nigerians, suddenly a businessman comes to you with a suitcase of cash and says, I want to help you.
Interesting. So you said, there's a quote of yours, you always say there is nothing special about the United States. So here's what I'm going to say to you. I need to ask you. Indeed, if there's nothing special about the United States, why then have they been able to sanction 4 ICJ judges just this week, literally, protect Israel to the point where every crime that has been committed by Israel, indeed Netanyahu, why have they been able to do that? Why is it that the United States, everybody, when I say everybody, all the Western countries are pretty much saying and waiting for the United States to say, okay, you know what? Yeah, you can break off with Israel. But more importantly, or very pertinently yesterday, we saw the Chancellor of Germany with President Trump pretty much saying, oh, President Trump, only the United States can sort out the war in Ukraine. So if there's nothing special about them, why is everybody going to them and expecting so much? And how do they get away with so much?
Very, very good question. So let's go to different levels of the question.
Yeah.
Firstly, let's just take the people of the United States, 300 odd million people. I've been there. You've met people from the United States. They're just people, they bleed. Some of them are interesting, some are boring. You put a television channel, and you watch Americans talking. They're as intelligent and stupid as people around the world. There's nothing in that sense special. I always find it funny when people say, oh, in the United States, they don't know which country is immediately south of them. Look, in most countries, people have terrible geography. So they're just like anybody, terrible geography. If I ask the average Nigerian, if I give you a blank piece of paper with just outlines of Africa's coastline, can you draw the 54 countries? Most people will have no idea how to draw all the old colonial lines. Where is Gambia? Where is Gambia? That's just a reality, yeah, because our education systems are useless. They haven't taught us about Pan-Africanism. Most people in Nigeria have probably no clue who Kwame Nkrumah was, where the African Union came. This is just because our education systems are not what they should be. We should be in school learning about things that matter to us, as well as things that are important like science and so on, so we can build things. So there's nothing special about ordinary people in the US. They are not stupider than people. They are not more intelligent. They're basically the same. Now, the government and the capitalist elites are indeed special in a couple of respects. The United States has the largest military in the world by a factor of hundreds. The US government spends close to 60% of annual global military spending. So there are about 8 billion people in the world. The US is a third of 1 billion and yet spends 60% of the world military budget. It has the capacity to destroy countries around the world, to destroy most countries. Nigeria can be destroyed in a matter of 10 days by the US. That doesn't mean they can enter into the country and govern it. They're very bad at that. They've showed that in Afghanistan, in Iraq. They're very bad at conquering places. They're very good at destroying places. They can bomb from on high from their ships and just level a country, just like the Israelis are doing in Gaza. They're very good at just destroying places. Okay, so that's scary, and that scares countries, and that intimidates countries into not being able to stand up for themselves, yeah? Including, country like Iran or China, which is cautious. They don't want to be destroyed. They're very cautious with the US. The tiger in the cage should not be poked don't poke the tiger in the cage. Don't aggravate the tiger, because the tiger has got claws and can etc. So one is the military. It is not a trivial matter. It's a very serious issue. They can literally level Lagos, and that's scary. That is scary to anybody. Secondly, because of the way in which the history of currency has progressed since the end of World War II, how our different national currencies had to interact through the gold standard, and how after 1971, we basically have to interact not only through the dollar, but through the petrodollar. In other words, the dollar, which is then given a kind of trust because the petroleum wealth is held in dollars, so that gives us trust in dollars. Also, everybody takes dollars, so it's easier for you and I to trade because I know that if I have a surplus of dollars from you, somebody else will take the dollars. But if I have a surplus of, whatever currency and nobody wants to take it, I have a problem. It's passing, it's like the music stops and I've got the parcel in my hand. Nobody wants it. Okay. So the dollar as the singular global currency has allowed the US to sanction countries because they will basically tell banks you can't give them dollars. They slow down the ability of a country to get credit, and that creates some problems. Now, this control over the world financial system through the dollar is weakening as more and more countries are beginning to trade in local currencies. And, someday the African continent might build its own digital currency so that Nigerian trade with, let's say, Benin or Nigerian trade with Ghana doesn't have to happen through dollars. It can happen through an African digital currency, call it the Afrique. That's what was to have been its name 20 some years ago. So if there is a kind of African monetary union, then within Africa, the 54 countries can trade in this digital currency. That's not a problem. It can reconcile eventually. The African Central Bank, when you create one, can reconcile the trade. If you have extra Afriques, you go there and they give you euros or renminbi or dollars or whatever. So as this is happening, the power of the dollar to sanction countries is diminishing. And I think this is important. When he was senator, Marco Rubio went on a TV channel and said that we have to stop de-dollarization because it's going to prevent us from controlling countries. So that's that's the other level. There's the military, then there's the dollars. And finally, what you saw with Mr. Merz, the German chancellor, with Donald Trump is actually them appealing to the Donald. Mr. Trump likes very much to be flattered, to be told you're the only one who could. They don't really mean it. That's not what Merz meant, but they have to talk like that. Mark Rutte, the head of NATO, went there and said, you're the greatest ever. There's never been a better president than you. Apparently, Trump likes to be talked to like that. He doesn't like to be talked to like a normal person. Well, that is an absolutely inflated ego. But again, I want to stop myself and say, hey, listen, we've seen this in our own countries. We've had leaders in our own continents who like to be treated as if they're gods. So let's not too quickly laugh at Donald Trump. I mean, we've seen this. Idi Amin was like that in Uganda. He liked to be called your, immortal, whatever. I mean, Mr. Mobutu Seko Seke was like that in the DRC. They wanted to be treated as like the instantiation of God on earth. Mrs. Indira Gandhi in India wanted to be treated as people had to think that India is Indira. They are the same thing. I mean, This is a problem. But with Donald Trump, because they have the military and the dollar, it actually means something.
Indeed.
It's not just words.
I know that my listeners want to call you, but before I open up the lines, I have two more questions that I must ask. Number one is Iran. Iran has never invaded any country, as far as I know. Iran has signed onto the nuclear non-proliferation agreement. Iran stays, if you like, within its lane. Then we had October 7th. Iran stood up. Well, Israel keeps saying Iran is the one that gives, that supplies Hamas with the weapons. October 7th, where I think is one of the dates in the history of the Palestinian history that even pro-Palestinians and humanitarians find very conflicting. So I'd like you to kind of, unpack that for us in a few seconds, whilst you also tell us why. And always say this: why in God's name are they so obsessed with taking down Iran? Iran stays in its lane. If they want their women to cover everything, that's their business. Why is Iran so demonized? And why shouldn't Palestine have anybody to stand up for them, if indeed they are the ones giving Hamas the weapons?
I mean, yeah, it's a very good question. And some of it has to do with the fact that as far as imperialism is concerned, nobody that tries to exercise their sovereignty, should be permitted to do so. As the United States has said on numerous occasions regarding Cuba, 11 million people, a tiny little island, and yet blockaded since 1959. It's unimaginable. Yeah. I mean, I was not even born then, and they started blockading it. My whole life it's been blocked. It's unimaginable. It's crazy. Because Cuba, as the U.S. says, is standing up. They are defying the U.S., and their defiance might become contagious. Yes, Iran, after 1979, defied the U.S., said, no, we're not going to follow your orders. And that defiance could become contagious. Right after the Iranian Revolution, there was a uprising in Pakistan. The U.S. embassy in Islamabad was captured. The few months before the Iranian Revolution, there was a revolution in Afghanistan in 1978, where the socialists came to power. There was a revolution took place, not long before, in a way, in Bangladesh, when Bangladesh broke off from Pakistan in 71, and there was a socialist leader. I mean, what they don't like is defiance, contagion, and especially if the defiance has a socialist character or it demands independence. Iran was never a socialist country, but they demanded independence and they demanded their dignity and so on. This is not permitted. Sorry. I'm sorry, it's not permitted. You are, in that sense, have the misfortune of being in a country where its political class has never really defied the West. It's never really said, we want to create a completely sovereign country, where we will deal with the oil, we will deal with this, we will deal with it. We don't need you to tell us what to do. We don't need your multinational companies. We will work this out. It is not. So you have not suffered in the way that, say, Ghana suffered, where Nkrumah stood up and said, sorry, we are not going to take your orders. We are a sovereign country. So the sovereignty is what they don't allow countries to exercise, because they want to have a say there. Now, part of this sovereignty for Iran has been to support the Palestinians, part of this sovereignty. But also, the Iranians have their own reasons. In other words, the Iranians built a first shield to defend themselves against an attack by the United States that included various Syrian militia groups, it included Hezbollah, it included Hamas, other Palestinian factions. In other words, if anybody attacked Iran, these groups would pummel Israel. So this was a kind of defensive shield. What the US and Israel have done is now destroy Iran's defensive shield. So Iran doesn't have that defensive shield right now. That's why it's being very quiet. Iran has lost the strength of the defensive shield. Hezbollah still exists. Hamas still exists. Other Palestinian factions still exist. There are not that many Syrian factions that exist anymore because the new government has basically demobilized them. But the shield is weak now, and so Iran is much quieter. But it still will exercise its sovereignty, and that's important. I mean, that is what you get hit hard for, is when you stand up and say, not any longer colonizer, not any longer. Yeah.
Now, before I open up the lines, I think we only have 10 minutes, 8 minutes or so. So before I open up the lines, I'd like you to talk to us very briefly about Palestine, the future of Palestinians, and indeed how it impacts the future of humanity as we would like it to be, as the world ought to be. I'm going to give you a minute, Prof, because they're calling already.
I'll be in less than a minute. I mean, if this genocide is able to succeed and if the Palestinians are removed from Gaza, I don't know if humanity will recover.
Okay. Right, you can call now. I will pick up your phone 0201 2770993 0201 4657190. Have you been sending a message to WhatsApp? I need to know if there are messages then. 0809 597 5805 and the lines are ringing. Right, I'm going to be showing you Decolonising, Prof. Hello. Hello. Hello.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello, evening.
Yes, good evening.
Yeah, it's Emmanuel.
Go ahead, Emmanuel.
First off is a comment and second is a question. First off, I want to appreciate people like Nelson Mandela who shaped my opinion, about the world and about the Palestinians and the Israelis, I really appreciate what he's done to a person like me.
Emmanuel, I need you to wrap up like the lines are going.
These talks between Iran and U.S., which the supreme leader of Iran, has rejected. Do your guests see the Iran, the mobilizing or dismantling their nuclear arsenal?
Okay, good question. Thank you. Right, Prof, I need you to write that down. I'll be with you in a sec. Hello?
Yep.
Hello?
Hello, good evening.
Good evening.
Yeah, I'm Alex from Hestack.
Go ahead, Alex.
On Iran. You said earlier that Iran has been quite unproblematic. But when we look
Well,
at
I didn't say unproblematic. I said they haven't invaded another country. It's two different sentences.
Okay, yeah, true. I'll agree to that. But I don't really care about Israel. But when you look at the good people of Lebanon and the good people of Syria who have been inflicted with Iran's proxy forces, where they have been literally dehumanized, don't you think that is actually a very big issue? That's
a question for Prof. I'll put it to him. Thank you. Right. Okay, hold on. Prof, can you write that down? I'll be with you in a sec. Hello.
Hello.
Yes, good afternoon, Titilokwe.
Yeah, thank you. My question is about this Marxist theory. Now, you see countries surrendering their dignity. Now, you see politicians from Africa, especially in Nigeria, going to Chatham House to talk to their bosses when those bosses are not going to be part of the elections. But Samad never came to Africa. Donald Trump never came to Africa. Even Ghana president never came to Africa, never went outside African continent. But you see Nigerian leaders, particularly now, going to Chatham House to disgrace themselves. Is this not foolishness? Because we have to stop this.
Okay,
madness.
all right. Is that a question for Prof?
African leaders fought for independence. You are not slaves.
Okay, do you have a question? Okay, Prof. I think you've triggered the Marxists in my listeners. Hold on. Hello. Hello. I'm going to cut you off. You have to call back. Right, Prof, I'm going to give you 2 minutes to answer that so I can pick up more calls. All those 4 questions.
Yeah, very quickly. With 3 questions. One,
3.
The Iranians don't have a nuclear weapons establishment. They have a program to build nuclear power. If they had a nuclear weapons establishment, they would likely have tested the nuclear weapon in order to say, don't attack us. They really don't. So that's one. There's nothing to dismantle. The second thing is about Iranian proxies. This is a serious question. It would take a very long time to get into it. But frankly speaking, it's Israel that has invaded the Golan Heights and now taken the buffer zone outside the Golan Heights. The Iranians didn't invade any of these countries. Merely that in these countries there were political forces that took inspiration from Iran. Hezbollah has been there without Iran, before Iran, and so on. It is not a proxy of Iran. That's a phrase used by Chatham House, the Chatham House crowd. And we should not take our marching orders from Chatham House. The leaders of Nigeria need to go to Addis Ababa. We need to create on the African continent our own, maybe we call it Nkrumah House, where we go and have our own discussions, intellectual discussions at a very high level. They give lectures at Nkrumah House in Addis Ababa, which is the capital of the African Union. So goodbye Chatham House, hello Nkrumah House.
Okay, you can call back now. I couldn't. Sorry. Right. Okay, I'm coming to your calls now. Hello? 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 Yes, go ahead. What's your name? Yes, hello?
Madam, what is my name from Surulere?
Okay, go ahead, Pastor.
Why is the tendency for African leaders to kind of compromise and look forward to the Western countries? Why is it like that? Are they afraid? Are they afraid of what the Western countries will do to them?
Okay, all right.
What is the problem?
Thank you.
Why are we?
Right, Prof. We're checking WhatsApp. I'm gonna give you a minute to answer that.
I mean, what can I say? This is a question to your own leaders, not to me. Ask them, are they afraid? I mean, why are you asking me? What am I supposed to say? Why should I speculate about your leaders? You live in a democracy.
Absolutely.
Ask your leaders. Okay. Don't ask me.
Thank you. Right. Hello. Hello.
Yeah, Maduka from Prashad.
Okay, go ahead, Maduka.
I think the problem in Africa is actually lack of vision on the part of the leaders. I don't buy into the fact, although the Western countries try to manipulate or try to control, but if the leaders, if they come into office with vision and they plan, and they pursue it.
I need to know if you have a question for Prof. I need to know what's the question.
Lack of vision. Even in Burkina Faso area, the vision is there, but it's a plan there. It's lack of vision, not Western countries. That's what I think. Thank you.
Right. So I guess the question is: are we suffering from a lack of vision, leadership-wise?
I mean, the answer is yes.
Is there?
Of course. It's not just a lack of vision. It's a lack of a theory.
Okay.
You need a theory. You need a path forward. Yeah. What's the path?
Indeed. I've got a question. The lines are going, but I'm going to have to ask you this question. With the ICJ and indeed the ICC now, America is not signed up. Israel is not signed up. They're ignoring the warrant. Western countries are allowing, Israeli Netanyahu and Gallant to go as they please. In the global south, I mean, the fear of the ICC is the beginning of wisdom. But yet, they don't care over there. What happens? Because we shouldn't all care. And if we don't all care, then what is the point? What happens to the world? Who is it that's going to hold these leaders accountable when they leave office? How do we ensure that they face the law? How is Netanyahu ever going to face the law?
Well, look, frankly, after let's talk plain for a minute.
Absolutely.
The way that the United States and the United Kingdom destroyed Iraq is stunning. 1 million plus people killed. A year after that war began in 2004, Kofi Annan, who was the Secretary General of the UN, a year after the war began, was on BBC, and he was pushed and asked, what do you think? Is this war legal? And Mr. Kofi Annan, a year into the war, said, no, it's not legal. It's illegal war. If the United Nations decides it's illegal war, then the leaders who are prosecuting this war are prosecuting a war of aggression. A war of aggression is a war crime. Where is George Bush? Where is Tony Blair? Why is Tony Blair trying to save Africa now? He should be in jail. We used to call the ICC, the International Criminal Court, the African Criminal Court, and then the Yugoslavian Criminal Court. That's it. It was the African Criminal Court. To pluck out, Charles Taylor and send him there. Charles Taylor, the United States created much more suffering than Charles Taylor did. I'm not saying Charles Taylor is a hero, but I mean, for God's sake, why wasn't Bush there? If Bush doesn't go to the ICC, Netanyahu is never going there.
Prof, you've got to come back. Like I said, honestly, we need you for 2 hours. The lines are still going. They're telling me to get off air. The news, we have to go to the news. Thank you so much. Will you come back?
In fact, I would like to come back in person.
Oh, wow. That would be amazing. Thank you so much, Prof. Thank you.
Bye. Thanks a lot.
Have a wonderful weekend. Bye-bye.
Plans are underway to evacuate Nigerians in Sudan.
99.3 Nigeria Info. We are more than just radio. Subscribe to our YouTube channel at Nigeria Info FM. Check us out on Facebook at Nigeria Info 99.3. Follow us on Twitter at Nigeria Info FM and on Instagram at Nigeria Info FM Lagos for live updates as it happens. 99.3 Nigeria